Today I'm gonna make sofritos. I've been eating soft foods for 2.5 years after surgery on my jaw. They're still really flavorful, they're just not crunchy. For ingredients, we're gonna need a poblano pepper, an onion, garlic, tomatoes, tomato paste, cumin, oregano, chili powder, chipotles and adobo sauce, and red wine vinegar. We're going to start with the onion. We need to cut it up. And because the sauce is going to go into the blender, it doesn't matter what size you cut up the onion pieces to be. They don't have to be really tiny. For the tomato, the recipe calls for Roma tomatoes, which are the ones that look like this. They have this kind of shape. They have less seeds and juice on the inside, which is why they get used for sauce a lot. But I don't mind seeds and juice, so I'm going to use some other tomatoes along with the Roma. We're also going to need tofu. I can't believe I forgot that. That's what I'm using as my soft protein, is tofu. You can use beans too. Those will work just as well. And the tofu that I'm using is tofu that I froze. Tofu can have two consistency. One is kind of like a stick of butter, although it's softer than that. And then the other one is more like a kitchen sponge. And when you freeze it, you get the kitchen sponge texture. Before I start chopping the onion, I'm going to start cooking the poblano pepper. The recipe recommends if you have a gas stove, you can char the pepper over a gas burner to add more flavor to it, or to give it the charred smoky flavor. But this makes me nervous. It makes me really nervous. And two, I've always seen people do it as a way to get the skin to come off of the pepper, which on a soft food diet, I like the idea of the skin off of the peppers because I think that makes them easier to eat. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to cook this pepper. See, I'm not even getting it close enough to the burner. I'm going to cook this pepper in the Instant Pot. I need to cook beans anyway, so as I cook the beans, I'm going to put the pepper in there too. So the pepper is still going to get a cooked flavor, it's just not going to get a charred, smoky flavor. Yeah, listening to the crackle and pop, ooh, makes me nervous. See, you're looking for these little, like the little bits right there, except you want that over the entire pepper, which takes a little bit of time too. So Instant Pot to the rescue. I'm using white beans because I don't think they have a very strong bean flavor. Although this is a Mexican dish, you could use pinto beans or red beans, which are beans that I think have a stronger specific flavor to them. White beans are kind of neutral to my tongue. I have a half cup of beans and I'm going to cover them with about 1 inch of a mixture of chicken stock and water. I'm going to cook it on pressure cook for 45 minutes. This onion makes me nervous too. Poor thing's getting to its last days. Now I cannot handle spice. Like, I may or may not have been the type of person to say that pepper is spicy. I can handle poblano peppers. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle using the entire poblano pepper in the recipe. This recipe is going to be a lot of adding a little bit in, tasting it, see how it tastes, see if it kills me. But I think even if spicy isn't your lane, there's a way to make this recipe so it still has a lot of flavor in it, maybe just not as much spice as was originally written into the recipe. So just personalize it. Well, we needed a medium onion, and that's about what we'll be left with when I'm done with this. We're going to chop up the onion. Normally, one way that I eat foods on a soft food diet, one rule that I follow, is I cut things up to be really, really tiny. I cut them up small enough so they're the size they would be if I chewed them myself. And then I don't have to worry about chewing them. I can just put them in my mouth, pushed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, and no chewing was necessary. With the onion, we don't need to worry about that because the onion is going to go into the blender. And so the blender is going to take care of any size pieces for me. I need about a tablespoon of olive oil. We're going to cook the onion for about 5 minutes and then add in the garlic. So while the onion's cooking, I'm going to start chopping up the garlic. We'll need 4 cloves of garlic. And I'm going to add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt to the onion to help it cook. Salt also enhances the flavor of other spices, so it'll help bring out the flavors of the oregano and the cumin when we add them in later. I'm going to cook it over medium to medium-low. Coating the onion in the olive oil in the pan also helps it cook. For the garlic, I prepare a whole lot of it at once. I get each clove, put it in the food processor, and then portion it out so that each square is equal to 1 clove. And then I don't have to mess with garlic every time I cook. After the onion turns translucent, we're going to add 4 cloves of garlic. And since my garlic was frozen, it's going to cool down the mixture and it's going to need a minute before everything comes back up to warm. I'm going to let the garlic cook for about 2 minutes while I gather up the tomato paste and spices. We're going to need 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, and we want it to cook in the oil. We need 1½ teaspoons of cumin, 1 teaspoon oregano, 1/2 teaspoon of chili powder, and pepper to taste, so that's personal preference. We're going to let these cook in the oil for a minute. I've heard that spices are fat soluble, which is why you need them to cook in the oil that the onion and garlic has been cooking in. I'm going to cut up the tomatoes into pieces similar sized to the onions. They don't need to be really small because they're going to go in the blender. So it's about 1/2 inch square. You need 2 Roma, but I'm going to use more than that. I like tomatoes and I have them in from the garden, so I'm probably going to use 4 to 5 small tomatoes. We're going to add in the tomatoes now, and we're going to use the moisture from the tomatoes to deglaze the pan, which is to scrape up any bits on the bottom, like the tomato paste. We'll use the juice from the tomatoes to scrape that off of the bottom of the pan. We'll let the tomatoes cook for about 5 minutes till they're soft, and while they're cooking, I'm going to start preparing the blender. To the blender, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of red wine vinegar. I got these chipotles in adobo because they're in a jar that can be resealed. There's also another brand, it starts with an E, and it comes in a can, and it has whole chili peppers in adobo sauce. The jar that I have has diced up chili peppers in adobo sauce. And the recipe recommends using a whole chili pepper and 1/2 teaspoon of the sauce, but since mine is all cut up and blended together, I'm just going to use 1 teaspoon of it, also because I can't handle spice. So I'm going to start with 1 teaspoon. If you can handle spice, I would recommend using 3 teaspoons to start, and then taste it once everything is blended together and see how it tastes to you. We need 1/2 cup of water. For the poblano, I'm going to use 1/2 of the poblano that I cooked in the Instant Pot and 1/2 of a raw poblano. I couldn't decide which one would taste better, so I'm just going to use 1/2 of each one and kind of split the difference. I'm going to add everything to the blender. I'm using a NutriBullet, which if you're putting hot things into a blender, you really want it to be able to vent, and I can't do that with a NutriBullet. So I'm going to add everything into the blender and let it cool down while I'm cooking the tofu. Tofu has a lot of water in it. I'm gonna squeeze out the tofu that I have because it really does feel like a sponge. I'm gonna squeeze out as much water as I possibly can, and I'm squeezing it into the pan so that you can get a visual for how much water is in the tofu. We're not saving the water for anything. As soon as I'm done squeezing it out, I'm gonna throw it away. I started defrosting my tofu 24 hours ago, and the middle of it is still pretty frozen. So I've been keeping it in a bowl of hot water while I cooked the rest of the sauce. But just to give an idea for timing, if you're going to be defrosting tofu from the freezer, I would give it 2 days to defrost in the refrigerator. We're going to tear the tofu into small pieces about the size of a blueberry. To cook the tofu, one thing I just learned the hard way is that you want to make sure to clean out the pan so there's no pieces of sauce left over. When I first started cooking the tofu, I started cooking it in the pan with the little bits of sauce left, and the pieces of sauce burned onto the side of the pan while I was cooking the tofu, and that's why I changed pans in the middle. So wash out your pan completely before you add in the tofu. We'll need a tablespoon of oil to cook the tofu in, and a pinch of salt to put on top of it. For the tofu, we're going to cook it on each side. I know the tofu is kind of an odd shape, but do your best to cook it on each side. You'll cook it on one side for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then flip it over and cook it on the next for a total cooking time of 10 to 12 minutes. Once the tofu is done cooking, I had to do mine in batches to fit into the pan. We'll add the sauce in, and we'll cook the sauce and the tofu together for 5 minutes. I'm going to eat mine in a burrito bowl. I put down some rice, and then beans, and then I put the tofu mixture on top. I put cheese on top of that, and I have a trouble with the cheese crust. I feel like that's something that I have to bite through. So after I melt the cheese, I mix everything together so that there's no cheese crust coating the top.